In early November 1541, a conspiracy was set in motion that would devastate Queen Catherine Howard's life within days, ultimately leading her to the executioner's block, an outcome the conspirators likely hadn't foreseen. The start of this conspiracy was reportedly an act of cowardice by Canterbury's Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. On All Saints' Day in 1541, King Henry VIII entered the chapel at Hampton Court Palace to pray. Here he discovered a letter from the cleric. The Archbishop urged the king to read it privately due to its explosive content. Cranmer's letter was indeed damning. He accused Queen Catherine of deceit and infidelity, alleging she had engaged in sexual relations with her former music teacher Henry Manox and a minor nobleman called Francis Dereham. There were even claims she had entered into a pre-contract of marriage with the said Dereham. These revelations were unknown at court, and Henry was initially disbelieving. His rose without a thorn, as he fondly called Catherine, could not have betrayed him. Nonetheless, he ordered an investigation, confident it would vindicate her. Shortly before, on that very same day, Henry had ordered prayers of thanksgiving for his wife, extolling her as a great blessing after the misfortunes he had suffered with his previous wives. I hope you could hear the, let's say, doubts I had in my voice when it came to the misfortunes. It is believed Cranmer chose to convey his accusations in a letter because he feared a face-to-face confrontation with the king, who was known for his explosive temper. Consequently, various accounts exist regarding whether Cranmer personally handed the letter to Henry or if it was simply left for him to find. Some historians even speculate that Henry himself might have orchestrated the entire episode. Despite the specifics remaining unclear, the king had ample reason to doubt his much younger wife. Unaware of the impending peril, Catherine continued to take wild risks, including having Dereham employed at her court. The conspirators were a group of leading Protestants, with Cranmer occupying a key position. From the outset, they distrusted the new queen. The Howard family, being conservative, aroused suspicions that Catherine's marriage to Henry VIII was a ploy to bring him back to the Catholic Church, despite her being a cousin of Anne Boleyn. The wedding date was symbolically significant. Henry married Catherine on July 28, 1540, the same day Thomas Cranmer was executed. Only 19 days had passed since his annulment from Anne of Cleves. Catherine's influential uncle, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, had introduced her to the court at the end of 1539, where she became a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves before the latter even arrived at court. Leading Protestants, including Lord Chancellor Thomas Audley, who had been instrumental in the English Church's break with the papacy, were alarmed. Throughout 1541, rumors of Catherine's possible pregnancy and her growing influence on the king intensified their concerns. Catherine's intercession had delayed the execution of Margaret Pole multiple times, strengthening the Catholics' resolve and leading to an uprising in Yorkshire by Sir John Neville. Despite this, Catherine's position remained secure. Tensions escalated when Henry and Catherine stayed with Sir John Gostwick, who had denounced Cranmer in Parliament as, quote, the root of all heresy. Meetings of the Privy Council at Gostwick's house, chaired by Bishop Stephen Gardiner, Cranmer's rival, further threatened the leading Protestants. Cranmer then shared crucial information with Audley and Edward Seymour, another leading conspirator. A man named John Lascelles had informed Cranmer about the Queen's immoral past. Lascelles' sister Mary, who knew Catherine from their time in the household of Duchess Agnes Howard, former Tilney, refused the position with the Queen, branding her, quote, light both in living and in conditions. Catherine's past included several sexual relationships, and there was even a pre-marriage contract with Francis Dereham, which would invalidate her marriage to the king, Lascelles reported. The conspirators likely aimed to destroy Catherine's influence and that of her family rather than to bring death about her. The evidence seemed insufficient for such a drastic outcome. Catherine had been a teenager when she married Henry, and premarital sex was not a crime. Therefore, the revelations were probably intended to annul the marriage rather than to have her executed. However, the conspirators made two crucial mistakes in their calculations. First, they greatly overestimated Catherine's influence on the king. She was not a political queen like Catherine of Aragon or Anne Boleyn. Instead, she knew how to dance and she wanted to have fun. When it came to politics, she only knew what was expected of her as queen, to submissively ask for mercy for certain people. One of the first people Catherine Howard stood up for was Sir Thomas Wyatt, a well-known Protestant who had only escaped the executioner in the past through his friendship with Cromwell. The Queen had neither the necessary education nor the interest to interfere in the religious fights of the time. Although Catherine was repeatedly strongly urged by her family to take certain political actions, she quickly showed efforts to free herself from this influence after her marriage to the king. Second, they underestimated Henry's resolve to uncover his fifth wife's past. Despite delegating the investigation to Cranmer, Audley and Seymour, Henry closely controlled the proceedings. Cranmer's letter to Henry on November 7, following his initial conversations with Catherine, reveals the king's direct involvement. I was purposed to enter communication in this wise. First, to exaggerate the grievousness of her demerits, then to declare unto her the justice of your grace's law, and what she ought to suffer by the same, and last of all to signify unto her your most gracious mercy. But when I saw in what condition she was, I was fain to turn my purpose and to begin at the last part first. The passive form I was purposed indicates that the archbishop had been given clear tasks for the interrogations. These apparently came directly from the king, as otherwise Cranmer would hardly have been allowed to ensure Catherine Howard your most gracious mercy. It was Henry's Privy Council who formulated the answer to Cranmer and ordered Catherine to be transferred to Sion House. This used to be an abbey, but it was a palace by then. The personal granted to the Queen is also recorded in this letter. It is hard to imagine that these points were decided without Henry's knowledge and approval. After all, Catherine Howard was still the Queen. The monarch himself also remained very close by during the investigations, stayed in the neighboring palace in the Oatlands. Officially, however, he commissioned Cranmer, Audley and Seymour, as mentioned, to lead the investigation. Since it seems difficult to imagine that he chose the leading conspirators against Catherine by chance, there were always the already mentioned assumptions that the monarch had staged most of the events. On the other hand, however, Henry knew who supported the Queen in principle. Such people are unlikely to be, let's say, motivated to clarify all the details during the investigations, especially if they don't like the details. Henry's agents worked quickly and efficiently after receiving the order to start an investigation. By November 3, rumors at court suggested one of the Queen's servants, Francis Dereham, had been arrested for piracy, a plausible charge given Dereham's financial sacrifices for his relationship with Catherine and possible ventures into piracy in Ireland to heal them. Catherine's uncle, Thomas Howard, was summoned to the palace next. The Duke of Norfolk was seen leaving a meeting of the Privy Council in a rage. From Catherine's point of view, this was no cause for concern. Her uncle had recently inspected the fortifications on the border with Scotland. It was speculated the king might have feared that there had been an uprising in Ireland supported by the Scots, and that war with Scotland was therefore imminent. The further happenings of these days seem to confirm this. Many council members suddenly worked deep into the night. Again and again, some of them went to London to run important errands. This was exactly the goal, as the investigation involved Lord Herbert of Cherbury would later testify. It was about, quote, not arousing a shred of suspicion. The French ambassador, Charles de Marillac, seems to have been the first person to suspect that all of this was about the Queen. He asked his spies to keep a close eye on Catherine's ladies-in-waiting. Presumably, the arrival of Andrew Pewson tipped the scales. He was a servant of Catherine's step-grandmother, Agnes Howard. He is said to have given a flimsy reason for his arrival. It was allegedly clear that he was mainly collecting information for his employer, who had received news about an upcoming questioning by then. It's safe to assume she was worried what was going on at court. On November 5, all doubts were dispelled as to whether it was about the Queen. Henry summoned the leaders of the English Church to Hampton Court. The arrival of the theologians was seen as a clear indication that it was about the king's marriage. The past set the example more than once. Aptly, arriving musicians who wanted to play for the Queen were sent away. Supposedly, they were told that there was no more time to dance. Henry himself is said to have felt, quote, pierced to the heart about what he had heard. The situation escalated on November 6. It was a Sunday. Catherine was officially confined to her chambers. Many of her relatives were imprisoned in the Tower of London. Catherine received this news from Cranmer, Gardiner, and her uncle. They told her that evidence had been found that she had been engaged to the former pirate Dereham and had lost her virginity to him. She had therefore concluded a pre-contract for a marriage with him. Catherine rejected these accusations as nonsense. It must have been quite a weird conversation with her uncle, as they both knew there was truth in these accusations. The further course of events became legend. Catherine is said to have panicked, broke away from her guards, and ran in the direction of her husband, who was listening to Sunday Mass. Supposedly, she almost reached him, but the guards caught up with her first. The tale of Hampton Court's haunted gallery was born. Supposedly, Catherine Howard's ghost is still desperately running along, screaming for her husband. Unidentifiable noises are still interpreted today as the desperate sobbing of the Queen. Back to Catherine on November 6th. The Queen had to watch her husband leave the court. He left her no message. This possibly made her panic again. Cranmer wrote to Henry on November 7 that he was worried about the Queen. Regarding her mental state, the archbishop reported, "I found her in such lamentation and heaviness as I never saw no creature." The Queen was so close to a frenzy that he had all dangerous objects removed from her rooms to prevent a tragedy caused by Catherine's own hands. Regarding the remaining probability of a frenzy at a later point, Cranmer was clear. "I do yet much suspect to follow hereafter." Catherine Howard apparently suffered from severe panic attacks. Its extent surprised even Cranmer. It was not only her arrest that may have caused this. Catherine knew that her accusers would find things from her past that could damage her significantly. By then, Cranmer, Audley and Seymour had pieced together her former love affairs from testimonies. The Queen's interrogations only began when the man had gained a comprehensive picture of Catherine's time in the house of her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard. Manox must have been very much in love with her. Catherine, however, did not let it come to sexual intercourse. Since he was only her music teacher, he was not suitable as a potential husband. However, she allowed him to touch, quote, the secret parts of my body, as she was to admit. Her relationship with Dereham was much more explicit. The couple called themselves husband and wife, which at that time could well be a basis for a pre-contract for a marriage. It was sufficient if it was concluded orally. The two teenagers allegedly had sex with each other up to 40 times. This went so far that the person with whom Catherine shared the bed no longer wanted to sleep in it. Dereham's noises were too disturbing. Dereham's jealousy flared up when Catherine prepared to go to court, leading to their breakup. Catherine's family, including her uncle, however, had told her that the king should never know about her past. She tried to follow this instruction until the very bitter end. However, this also opened up an opportunity to endanger her. Anyone who knew about Catherine Howard's background could cause considerable harm to the Queen and her family, and Dereham shamelessly made use of this opportunity. First, he blackmailed Catherine's step-grandmother into taking him back into service in her household. Then it was the Queen's turn. Dereham forced her to take him in. Not only did he have constant access to her chambers, but he also knew who was visiting. At the same time, he boasted about the history he had with Catherine. He also said that he could well imagine marrying her after Henry died. He was a time bomb ticking away. Cranmer thought it was the prospect of the king's mercy that calmed Catherine during their time together. This doesn't have to be wrong, but it might fall short. Manox and Dereham endangered her marriage to Henry, but not her life. She had not betrayed the monarch and had not been guilty of any crime, and the investigation could not substantiate the suspicion of adultery. Dereham also stood by his statement under severe torture that he had not had sex with Catherine after her wedding to Henry. This coincided with what the Queen herself had also testified. Catherine's situation was bad, but apparently not dramatic. Henry had assured her of his friendship, and she was not guilty of any crime. The worst accusation she seemed to face was that she had kept the monarch in the dark about her past. The pre-contract with Dereham may even have been useful to her. If it were accepted as a fact, her marriage to Henry would be annulled. She could therefore no longer be accused of having betrayed her husband. Then, however, Dereham broke down during torture and revealed a name that was to cause Catherine's brutal death: Thomas Culpeper. We will continue this soon. Thanks for watching and please like and subscribe. Bye!